So, welcome everyone. Now we are at the laboratory again. And now, today I'm going to give a small tutorial on what we really do here for a living, let's say. But this is sort of an active research to how we would like to develop instruments that we can do measurement, high fidelity measurements in flames. And we're going to mostly focus on how we can measure temperature and how we can measure species concentration for today. And then in my previous lectures I briefly talked about light sources, about lasers, the basic technology of lasers, and this is now we're going to go more into how it looks in the real world, let's say. So these are actually a very big laser. It's a femtosecond laser which it's all in this unit. This is the main unit for creating this very short laser beam, which is a femtosecond laser beam. And that consists itself of many different parts, also small lasers in itself. And I will, in a second from now, I will also open this lid and show you briefly how this is been done. But at that output of this laser, this is a bit custom built for us. So we have designed it so that we have two different outputs. One is coming here, which is a transform limited femtosecond laser beam that is used to pump this module, which consists of a device so that we can convert the femtosecond laser beam into a picosecond laser beam. So that is now 3 orders of magnitude less in pulse duration, but it's still, for our conception as humans, extremely short, of course. You would imagine that if I was stand here my entire life and measure here every day, every time I breathe, let's say, and I would shoot this laser that runs at 1 kilohertz with these femtosecond laser pulses, that entire measurement would never add up to a second. That's how short that is. And that would basically be true for a picosecond laser as well. But we talked about the transform limitation when you have lots of wavelengths that are all traveling in phase, that experience a collapse on itself, so you get a very short laser beam. That's your femtosecond laser pulse. So one could think about the easiest way to create the picosecond laser pulse would be to filter some of these wavelengths from the femtosecond laser beam, because that would immediately give you a picosecond laser beam. You just select a couple of wavelengths within this bandwidth to get your picosecond, this discrimination, and that is what we call bandwidth carving. So it can be done with filtering techniques. So we send a laser beam for a filter which rejects some of the wavelengths, and then on that other side that will happen in itself, that it creates a picosecond laser beam. But this is done slightly more sophisticated here, because in that bandwidth carving scheme, then we throw away lots of wavelengths. And that is not a good photon economy. So we think a lot about photon economy, how to use all photons that we ultimately generate. We plug this in the electricity in the wall, we create our photons, and now we like to use them. We don't like to throw them away. So this is done here, very sophisticated, that most of these femtosecond photons are converted to picosecond photons in a very short time. And how is that done? I try to explain very simply, but anyhow, when we talk about the transform limited pulse, that means that all photons are traveling with different wavelengths all together. Now, you can create a chirp to that. So think about the bird song. They sweep the frequency like that. That is the same. Color is very much in analogy to frequency here. They are reciprocal to one another. So if we sweep to make all these frequencies arrive at different times, then we have a chirp. It's called a chirp ramp. So coming from blue, from the red, arriving at different times along the optical pathway like this. Now, we split that pulse into two, and then we flip that ramp with one another. So one ramp comes with a positive chirp, and the other ramp comes with a negative chirp. So that means that in this, the blue arrives before the red, and here the red arrives before the blue. The blue tail, we'll talk about that. Blue shift and red shift in photons. Anyhow, and these chirp bands are now combined in a crystal, which means that they convert to the same frequency across the crystal like that. So that's how we can basically press all this broad bandwidth into a narrow bandwidth without losing too many photons. There is one limitation, and that's the conversion efficiency in the crystal. But other than that, we have mostly used all of our photons to create the picosecond pulse that comes out here. So, the picosecond pulse here, the femtosecond laser pulse here. Now, this comes out as a chirp laser pulse. So then we have an external compressor to make it such that we tighten this up. So it's a transform limited pulse. Because that is something we want to send to the molecules, that we measure in the flame. We need to send in a pulse where the molecule experience the blue and red photons simultaneously, because we drive energy transitions within the molecules. And that is only happening when they have access and see both these two wavelengths simultaneously. And that is also very clever, because if you have these, which you call a pre-chirper, you can always compensate for the different coatings of the optics. You can actually send these very delicate pulse through combustor windows. And that is a big chunk of glass like that, where the pulse and different wavelengths travels with different velocities inside of the glass. So then you will always have a chirp beam on this side. Now, if you can always reverse that chirp already here, that you pre-chirp, you compensate for that, then you arrives at pre-chirp, and behind the window is transform limited again. So that's the finesse with that. So these three modules are these. The main laser, which spits out two optical trains with 1 kHz femtosecond laser pulses. One train of that is used to convert to a picosecond pulse train coming out here at 1 kHz, and this is a pre-chirper that sort of engineers this pulse so that it satisfies the probe volume in the flame later on. And I will come to that later. Now we will pause the video, and I will show you the inside, the interior of this main laser. Okay, so now we're inside the laser. We have opened the lid, and we have actually tripped the interlock, meaning that we can run the laser while we do some work here. Sometimes you need to go in and optimize a couple of mirrors to pick up the beam power and so forth. But of course we're in the laser lab, so that's why I need to wear goggles now. I have this optical depth for all these wavelengths that are included. You see the green light, but you also see a faintest red light, and these are basically what it is. I will go through everything here. So first of all, I start with a C laser that pumps the oscillator for the femtosecond laser. So this is basically, the oscillator is to create a femtosecond laser pulse with all these wavelengths traveling together. And what's very important to think about there is that how that is achieved. So there are dispersion compensation elements, which means that basically within the cavity there's always identical path length, so that they will experience the same path length independent on the wavelength. That makes them, all the photons travel together, so that's why you have that collapse. But it also needs to happen in time. That first, when you start a laser, you can have it's called ASC, amplified stimulated emission, that you basically pump a crystal and out comes your photons, but they're not traveling in time together. That means that they are completely uncorrelated like that, and that will not lead to a collapse in time. So they need to travel with the same phase. And that is done with basically a optical curve gate that basically happens within the crystal, so that when you're pumping the crystal, that intensity leads that slightly different focusing properties of the laser beam. So that can only happen, so that happens actually self-sustained. This is a very interesting, quite deep why this happens, right? I often compare that with the hen and the egg. What's happening first? Because it can only happen, this change of the focusing properties through the crystal in that index of refraction of the material can only change with that is highly intense, the light that is passing through the crystal. And that is actually only happening when all these wavelengths are traveling together. But that is the lock device. It's called mode locking, and that's happening when all these wavelengths are traveling together. Okay, so that means that when they travel together, you get that collapse, and out comes a pulse on this side here. And that is on a very, very fast repetition rate. It's 80 megahertz, the repetition rate of that pulse train, and that is too fast for us to use, and it's also that it's very, very modest power of each of these laser pulses. So we are utilizing all these instruments in the gas phase. You know that measuring gas molecules, the medium is quite sparse. So we need to have lots of photons so we can communicate with the molecules in the gas phase. So that means that we need to amplify these pulses. And that is done here. So that is the amplifier stage, and it's called the chirp pulse amplification. And that is also a very high finesse technology that has opened a clear gateway in science, so that it was rewarded the Nobel Prize a couple of years ago in physics. And how is that done? Yeah, so people have managed to achieve this, to create a very short pulse, but with modest power. So when they went through this amplification, the pulse, when the photons traveled all together, then when hitting a window, it became too intense, so that degraded the window, and ultimately it just cracked. So that was not possible. So that was quite ingenious to come up with this technology, so that researchers came up with the idea that let's chirp this pulse. I explained this chirp round before. So now the different wavelengths or frequencies will arrive at different time to a window or to an optical component, let's say. So then you will not have this irradiance in each time slice that you will have with a transform limited pulse. So that was basically to send in the laser pulse in the amplifier, and then you can amplify the pulse. That is done here. The stretcher is called, you stretch the pulse, you amplify it, and then you compress the pulse. That is basically what the CPA is doing for us. It stretches the pulse, amplifies it, and then it compresses it in the end. So then it's, again, a transform limited pulse. So that is done with this. This is a combined internal compressor, and then this is the amplifier stage itself. So that consists of an additional gain medium, which is the same crystal, which supports this broad band all the wavelengths. It's called titanium sapphire crystal. And that is pumped with a laser here, and that is the green laser. And the green laser consists of another laser first. It's a 1064 that gets frequency doubled to 532. That's indivisible, that's why you experience now it's green. And that is coming in here, pumping this gain medium, and then you're sending in this femtosecond pulse. You recall we discussed this population inversion, and then you have a regenerative amplified scheme where the pulse travels back and forth through this gain medium and experience more and more gain like that. So that's what we call the build-up trace, and that is happening pretty fast. It's a couple of round trips, maybe 4 to 5. You'd like to do this as fast as possible because there's always inefficiencies in all windows, so you'd like to build that up as quickly as possible, and then you'd like to switch the pulse out. And that I also explained during the lecture, that is done through polarization switching. So this is how it looks. Since now you're aerospace engineering students, I will give you one funny insight here, that the laser technologist who came here to install this device, he called this end mirror here as the afterburner, and that is something we are more familiar with in the aerospace rather than laser architecture, but that is basically to use the pumping of this pump laser more efficiently. That you have that it goes through one path, but it goes on the reflection path again, backwards here. You pump the crystal more efficiently with this afterburner. So that I thought it was a funny remark in all this. So now let's continue again on this other side. Yes, so welcome back. We have now changed the location of the camera. We were before zooming in on the main laser, but now we're zooming in on the different sub-models here. So I talked about this is how we convert a femtosecond beam to a picosecond beam, and this is all a passive device. So what is happening here is here's the entrance to where the laser beam comes, gets split in two different directions, and then it gets compressed or stretched and compressed differently here. So you have this chirp round, and then you achieve this conjugated chirp. So that is done all here, and then it's coming back here, and both those start to become focused here because they need to be focused in the crystal. All these are non-linear optical conversion processes which always benefit from high irradiance, high intensity. So that's what you do that's why you need to focus the beams through this crystal, and that is happening here slowly into between mirrors, actually concave mirrors, and that is focused in. They get crossed, and that satisfies a certain phase matching configuration is called, and actually on this other end is coming out and it has changed color. So we will do a small zoom in, slightly on the light before the color and slightly on the color after. So now I will show you quickly the light before the crystal. You see that it has this closer to 800 nanometer wavelength. It's actually the tail that you experience that can be recorded here. So it's between 780 nanometer to 820 nanometer, this light. And it also has some interplay with that it hits the card and creates some fluorescence in the card. But anyhow, you see that it's this color, and if I look shortly after, it has this double wavelength, let's say. Yeah, you double the frequency and you're shorting the wavelength with approximately half here. So you go from something that is centered at 800 nanometer on this side to something that is centered at 400 nanometer on that side. And that is happening through this conversion. Highly non-linear optical effect in this crystal. Yes, so now we've opened the lid also on the external compressor, and I will show you a little bit the path length with this index card as well, that the laser is coming in this way, and then it gets split, and here it gets like folded on two, it's called a grism pair. That is two gratings that are formed together, and together they introduces an extra pathway from one wavelength with respect to the other. So I don't know if it can be seen slightly here. When I dip the card in the laser beam, it's only very subtle, but still this is more of an elongated beam. So it comes like here, and it makes these two passes. Here it gets reflected down again, coming back on itself more or less, and is now compressed coming out of here on this side of the laser. Okay, now now we're coming to the most interesting part. I guess it depends on who you talk to what's the most interesting. But we have explained now that we have these two picosecond, two beams. One is a picosecond and one is a femtosecond. That's basically coming out of these two models. And there's lots of optics, lots of things here, but we're not going to discuss everything in detail like that. But let's say that these beams are now going to be combined at the burner. And you have been doing your laboratory exercise on this fuel pipe here. And this is the same that we're going to use for this tutorial. So I'm going to dip now my card in both these laser beams, and I hope you see it here. So you see that this is the picosecond beam. We have this 400 nanometer wavelength, closer to the blue, and this is 800 nanometer wavelength beam, which is closer to 800, the red, closer to red. And these ones, if I now slide the card like this, you see that they will become crossed here. You know, their overlap becomes tinier and tinier, and here the intensity is so high that you start hearing that it's blasting the paper. So now this is actually a 1 kilohertz pitch. So based on this sound, you should be able to recognize that this is the repetition rate of the laser. And then coming out again, they travel both these into slightly different directions, but where they are crossed, that's where we generate measurements in the flame. So that's how we achieve the spatial resolution. And this can be done very, very carefully with the image beam profiling camera that you slide through the overlap and looking at how well these beams are overlapped in the flames like that. So now we are going to go from this frame to understand that laser is on, is crossed over the measurement location, and we're going to generate signal. Now we're going to look at the screen on the other side of the lab to see how the signal looks like. Okay, so now we're going to display, to get very, very close to what's happening in an optics lab. First of all, you notice that it's now pitch darkness. That's very important. We often work in very, very dark pitch darkness in the lab. So this is all authentic. But if you look now on the screen, you actually see the signal that I talked about. It's called, for this technique, coherent anti-Stokes Raman spectroscopy. So we generate this signal from air for the moment, because now this is now focused, the laser beam above the burner nozzle, but there's no flame there yet. So what you see is a room temperature signal from air. Some of these lines comes from nitrogen, some of these lines comes from oxygen. But now I will show you very convincingly that, and all these discrete lines come from how well the quantum states, rotational quantum states, are populated in the gas. That's why it's so accurate for thermometry, because it's recording the full distribution, not only on one state or another state, is recording on all states simultaneously. So that is to recover the Boltzmann population distribution, which is a function of temperature in the gas. But now I will block the signal, and then you will see, look at the screen simultaneously, and then you will see that it disappeared. So you see on the screen only noise, no signal, and you see the laser beams. I'm blocking them with the card. Now I remove the card, and you see the signal. And I will do that back and forth a couple of times. It becomes very convincingly that we're now recording this signal. And I can also do it like this, where I only block one beam. I'm only blocking one beam, it's the same. So it needs to be having, so this is on one beam. And then I need to block it, of course, before. Then I'm blocking before, only one beam. And then the signal disappears. And if I block it from this side, the other signal, the other laser beam, the femtosecond beam, no signal, no signal, no signal. So it needs to have both the beams, and it's generating signal only when the beams are crossing. So now we're going to look at the high temperature signal as well. So we're going to turn on the flame and then compare to what we see now on the screen and how it looks when you generate the signal in a high temperature environment. Okay, so now what we do is that we generate the signal in the flame. So now when you look at it, you see that the flame is on. You see at the signal at the screen, and I will very convincingly now block the signal again. So you see no signal, signal, no signal, signal. I do it from this end as well. I block one of the laser beams, no signal. This is 10-second signal, no signal. and then I do it from the other side. I block the picosecond beam, no signal. No signal. So, this is very interesting, and you see that the character of this is very different from the room temperature signal. There are much more states that are populated due to that we are now in a high temperature regime in the flame, and then you have it's much more broadband signal, more rotational frequencies that are populated. And if I translate now the flame, I will shift it here, relative to beam overlap, you will see that it's the signal, look at the signal on the screen, it changes. When it goes now to a colder region, I get more signal towards the lower rotational frequencies. It's colder, the signal starts to saturate as well, because then the density is such that I have much more molecules to measure from. Well, if I go back to the high temperature region, slowly, there, due to the very high temperature in the flame, there's simply less molecules to generate signal from. So that's very challenging, of course, for diagnostics. I told you in the beginning here that that's why we need high power in the laser beam, lots of photons to generate the signal. But why do we need these short laser pulses? That is also because the electric fields get so intense, so we need, in that sense, we can employ less pulse energy. If you would compare it to a nanosecond laser, you would have much more, need more pulse energy even to generate the equal signals. So I do it again, I translate it, the flame relative to the beam overlap, and you will look at the signal, how it changes, going to colder region in the flame. It shifts, gets stronger, of course, more molecules when it's cold. But then I slide it in again. So these are in the product gases, slightly above the inner flame cone, the premix zone. Beautiful, isn't it? Okay, so now we have blocked all the lasers. That's why I could remove my goggles. That's very important. Think always about safety in a laser lab. Now we have the signal here that you saw on the screen. It's recorded from room temperature. But how on earth can we see the different spectral components here? So that means that we have to somehow, we have talked about telescopes, we talked about spectrometers. This is what I want to explain now. So basically, I first explained the lasers. I didn't pay so much attention to the optics, but there are lots of optics here to, let's say, format the beams so that they give this nice overlap in the flame, which is the probe volume, and that we only generate signal in that probe volume. That is generated on a fast repetition rate, but we can also think about that we actually cross two sheets here. So it's a crossed plane technique where two crossed laser sheets, when they cross, they form a measurement line. So we generate a one-dimensional signal simultaneously. So we can look at spatially correlated temperature and species concentrations in the flame. Now I only show you 0D information, which is a point information, but that is now the principle that what's going on here. So now we have built, and that side is the signal generation side, let's say, and this side of the burner is the signal detection side. And yeah, consists of an open spectrometer and basically two matching telescopes. So first, I grab the spatial information, and that is reformed here to a small slit. This doesn't need to be used, so it could be an entirely wide field coherent imaging spectrometer, but this is sometimes of convenience because you want to reduce also stray light from the laser, so from the flame. A flame is very bright in itself, lots of spontaneous emission coming from the flame. And that is something that we can discriminate here quite easily. And then the signal actually gets split here to two detection channels and gets, with this telescope, there are many items within the telescope here. So this is the collection lens and this is the focusing lens, which focus the signal on the camera face, which is here. And the finesse here, there are many finesse. I'm not going to go into details because this is an active research for what we're doing. We're doing quite novel spectrometers here where we split the detection in different channels and look at things simultaneously. But what I can explain to you very simply here is that here is a transmission grating. So with the telescope, we are grabbing spatial information that we relay from the object plane, which is the flame, to the camera plane, which is here. But simultaneously we break the light in its spectral components, and that is done through this item here, which is a transmission grating. So when the light comes here, now it's not the concept of refraction, but it's the concept of diffraction. Refraction, diffraction is different. So diffraction means that different wavelengths is transmitted constructively in different directions, being transmitted through this. So that's what we break out the light in different light components that you see in the spectrum here. That this has light different colors and they get sent through different angles exiting this diffractive element here, which is the transmission grating. And that gets then focused. So this spot on the slits gets focused here, but it's in its different color. One might explain it like that. So with that, I think we have a sticky mat here. So lots of sound in the laser lab, a sticky mat. Don't move too much when you're in a laser lab. But anyhow, what I want to tell you also, and this is pretty cool, right? This is our entire spectrometer. It's in the open, lots of items. But compare that to this is also a spectrometer where everything is sort of very compact, folded, very compact within this box. And this you use for your laboratory exercise to look at the spontaneous flame emission. So that is differently, but the principle is very much the same. But here we do coherent imaging, and there we did incoherent imaging with the flame emission, and that was through channeling the light to the entrance of this fiber spectrometer here. So that is led then to the spectrometer, and then that gets digitalized and displayed on the screen as well. So with that, I'm very, very happy that I could have this tour with you. It was a little bit sad that you couldn't be with me here, but next time you will be here, and then we will have an interactive session where you have some possibility to ask questions and so forth. But take a look at this video, and you can always ask me for curiosity later, and we can have a shared discussion on what everything was displayed here. So take care, and good luck now with the rest of the course. See you.